Does it matter to be or not to be? This is our podium of the day. We have decided to entertain this space in a different way, for then, as we all ascertain to it, that something more is always coming forward and thus best describing the whole circumscript as to its own effect. So when we all correlate to this platform, we know that a more than ever is always performing. It has an objective of some sort of coalescing nature that brings about a total effect. It brings about an all-spatial living of some sort where, as we all dispose of our own life onto such certainties of living that are accountable to our own performing, we can then acclaim to such a space and say to our own effect, we love you. We have this intensity of living that is always there among it all. We have this certainty of being that has a prevalence of some sort. It has a simple, meaningful effect of truly understanding how all perspectives are always of a one common ground of discernment. So when we all seek to own it in some sort of podium of living, we as well have this formatting effect of truly understanding it from within the deepest perspective. We understand that altogether, a more is always a something that creates from within an ultimate perspective of some sort of recognition. We know that when it has come about or is justly onto its own performing, we know that it has a far and more progressive nature that is now undertaking its own effect. We have this certainty of being it. We have this knowledgeable possibility of truly understanding that when it is happening, we know of to its own encountering. So these opportunities that are now prevalent among it all is most certainly a certainty of what all life can so well be fully experienced as. We have this all one common ground of truly understanding how all objectives can most certainly come together and thus format a new one of some sort, a new ideology of what all life can possibly exist as by simply subscribing to our own effect, these newness, these patternings that have one commonality of some sort that brings us all onto its own ship. Just like music and art, artistic effects, some form of creative endeavor where, as we all encounter it, we all know of to its ultimate life performing, happening in front of us in these momentous accountabilities. So when we all take these turns of discernment and allow for all the more to come into practice, allow for all the more to come into a certitude of being, then we are an all agglomerated performing of some sort, an all-encompassing one that has coexisted among it all as to its own effect, most certainly. So now when we all come together and have these performances of some sort of self-well-being, we can then allocate to each one's own our more than natural effect, our more than common ground of discernment. We can bring to this platform of living that something more that is to our own, our most discerning objective. The one that we regard life more as. The one that we put on our lens of discernment and allow for life to exist as into its highest performing atmosphere. We know that when we encounter to such a passage, we have a whole effect together. We know that when this accountability does so well be experienced, we are then in a full one encountering of some sort of endearmentship of some sort, a coalescing nature, a cohesiveness of some sort of adventure where the wholeness is prevailing altogether. We know when it happens, and thus onto such an encountering, we have a choice we can make. We can choose to encounter it, acclimate our own being to its own experiencing, and thus prevail among it all. Or we can choose to say to the whole, for sure, yes, I'm going for it. I will travel through time and space to get there. I will try whatever is needed to find that sureness, that being it is my most prevalent moment as to its own effect. So when we all organize these all conceptualize visions of some sort, we know when to intercept and thus behave as to its own by its own behavioralship. We know when to come together and acknowledge to such a spatial self-wellness fully prevailing onto its own encountering. We know when the whole soul wellness of truly being it is now being demonstrated among it all as to its own effect. We know when this whole prevailing momentous accountability then comes together and thus acclimates its own being as to self-well-being it, as to its own all-prevailing momentous accountability. So we each have these one encounterings. We know that all together as one, we can formidably exist. We already have had that one encountering in our truest past, present, future existence, experimentalities we have sought well to be as well as it has. So when we all encounter this in one common ground of soul well experiencing, we each have into each one's own effect a knowing of these certainties, thus a most prevailing momentous accountability. So when we all so well get to these platforms where all are so well fully present into and among it all, we as well experience this whole momentous accountability of truly being together as one. We know of its vibratory effect. We so well understand it momentarily and then for more progressively. And as we all ascertain to such a podium of truly being it and understanding how it has come about, then this whole concept of not choosing to be then becomes extinct and defunct, for then we are it as one forever and for more. So when we encounter to such a podium of truly being it, then we can say to each one's own, how come now, by this significance presence, we are ascertaining to it? How come we can now significantly best describe it to each one's own as it has so well progressed among? So when we all, each one encounter to such a podium of to our own truest experiencing, we know that it has gathered a momentous accountability. It has gathered something more than we can individually, indicatively best describe. In all attempts of being as one, we cannot find or describe these words of discernment that brings us all along together. We have an idea of what it felt like, what it feels into, and what we so well fully represent. But when this uniqueness of two ownership is then fully present in and among us all, we as well know and own to such a podium where life has already substituted into each one's own effect as something more of to its own natural life-giving perspective. So we each have had to encounter this on some sort of podium of truly experiencing among it all. And as we each have had this one encountering of some sort of behavioral shift where all has so well progressed among it all, then we seek beyond our own natural lifespanning of this self-wellness experiencing and thus become our own effect. We know that it has a significant progression of some sort. We self-well understand it as we make our own passage throughout it all as to its own effect. And as we each reach this placement, this podium, this life-spanning perspective of some sort of undescribable performing, we are then in full one agreeability, fully self-well aligned to its highest possibilities. So when we each have this podium truly describing itself onto our own effect, we can then relate it. We can then bring it to all as to its own potency of living. We can then best describe it to its own quotient of self-well-being. We can make an approach on life and then say to all, how come am I here? But then we say to our own, what a perfect effect I am. I truly am great. I truly know how to manage my own consciousness. I have this highest perspective of truly being it. I have come to these wheels of fortunate in my own life. And I have this full one discernment and full experiencing. I have this full one effect of truly understanding how great all that I am is fully experiencing. So when we all get this and thus are now fully capable of describing this from within each one's own unique, discerning, living patterning, then we can say, most obviously, that we have come to such a placement. We know of it. We are here now experiencing its whole effect, its whole encountering, its whole greatest possibilities of truly being it, its whole highest potency, potentiality of self-wellness experiencing itself among it all, and most certainly as it has forever progressed onto its own effect. So when we all self-well navigate these highest possibilities, we can most certainly make our way forward and thus passage through this magnificence and allocate to our own this highest degree of truly being as to its own highest velocities of living we can self-well imagine as to its own effect. So when we take these passages of truly understanding how greatest all is to our own living pertainment, then things do take a turn of event. Things do take a turn of some form of understanding. We then begin to far catch into the heavens of all times these knowledgeable emissions of truly understanding, we then fully grasp how profound all humans are to its most highest degree of conceptualized emissions. It is then that a most deepest understanding comes about. We then fully take these bows of discernment. We acknowledge most deeply these highest aspects of what we are one so well fully capable of being. We take these placements of discernment, we agree to it, we come to our own complexities of being, we agglomerate the whole to it as best as we each can possibly self-well imagine. And then there comes a time where this admittance can be sustainable, can be livable, can be fully possibly capable of self-well experiencing, fully capably in all possibilities acknowledged by the whole podium of all whom we are together. So when we get there to that emplacement of living where all coexists as one's own truest living effect, then we are then ultimately experiencing it. We are having in our own each unique perspective this highly engaging capacity, possibility of living that is now fully performing from within each one's own effect. So now we most certainly can engage this if we have not already. And as we engage this highest magnificence that is now imbuing into each one's own living, then we can say most endearingly that this is this time of opportunity that we all have been so well wishing for. It is now. It is now happening. It is now existing among us all. It is now prevailing in all wishful thinking. It is all predominant in all perspectives of living that we have forever progressed onto as we wield this fortunate opportunity of living forward as we each own one highest gradient of truly resplendent perspective. So now we each are this one podium truly experiencing itself. We have this highest degree of self-wellness prevailing among it all. We own it. It is to our own deepest endearment. It is to our own far and progressive nature of truly understanding how else is as justly as to we each are our own, living here, now, fully ascertaining to such a spatial living effect. So now, we each are now, again, performing. We have this one podium truly experiencing itself. We reach out, we bring about this one self-well emission, and thus, as we each are one to its own podium of truly experiencing potency, then we each are now of one common ground of discerning objective. We have amalgamated to such a throughout effect of to its own experiencing by simply witnessing it and thus sharing it into one common ground of truly understanding perspective. So now we each are then one in a common ground of experiencing, and as it has, we continue progressing on, acknowledge to such how all experiencing are always together as to its own effect, and as we each we take a bow of discernment, we agree to it and say to the whole, how amazing was all this, as we all achieve this highest competency together by each one's own uniqueness, as well as we have far and ever progressed onto its own effect. And as we are now fully pertaining to this into each one's own unique perspective of truly being it. And that's it. That's with my greatest love and discernment that I say to the whole, thank you once again, and we shall be back and come and share and discourse and discuss another option of living. Thank you. Great day to everyone.